this in history here. You will see here the S&P 500 index. We're going to be breaking this down in this video today. The S&P 500 historically goes up on an average of 10% per year. But over the last year, from now until October of 2023, we've seen a nearly 40% return on the S&P 500. The S&P 500 historically is named the stock market. When you see people saying the stock market is up, they are referring to the S&P 500 index here. In this video today, we're going to be breaking this down and telling you and explaining further from an elementary level view what exactly is the S&P 500. Let's talk about it. The S&P 500, you can consider it almost having 500 Legos. And within these 500 Legos, you have your top 10 Legos. And so we're going to go and look at these top 10 Legos here today when they think about as far as companies that's inside of the S&P 500 index here. And so when we look at this here, we're going to see these top 10 companies here that's inside of the S&P 500. We look at companies like Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon, Meta Platforms, which is Facebook, which owns WhatsApp, Instagram, Threads, Facebook itself, and Facebook Messenger. We look at Google, which is Alphabet, Berkshire Hathaway, which is owned by Warren Buffett, another class into the Google, Eli Lilly, which is the #1 healthcare company, #1 insulin manufacturer in the world, and Broadcom, which is the artificial intelligence company, also a tech company here, right? And so when we look at the S&P 500, not only is it just 500 companies, but it's also 11 different industries inside of the S&P 500. The way I like to explain this is the S&P 500 is the mother. Now the mother has 11 different kids here. And so when we look at the performance of the 11 different kids over a 5-year time span, I say, well, what's the best performing kid here? The best performing kid you will see here is technology. Technology is up 177% so far this year. And so, I'm sorry, over the last 5 years here. So you also want to look at, well, over the last 1 year period, what's the best performing kid here? When you think about it and you look at it and you go over here and look at the numbers here, we will see that communications is up 40%. Also, financials is up 45%. These are your best performing sectors in the S&P 500. But over the long term here, you will see that the S&P 500 technology is the best performing sector here. And so when we think about the S&P 500, we also want to think about, man, how has it really been performing? When you go right here and you look at the S&P 500 and we look at this here, you take $100. And when I was born here in 1982, this same $100 invested in the S&P 500 today will be worth about $12,792. Guys, that's a great return here. It's averaging about 12% per year, as you would say. You would take someone else here, and if you started back and say the last 20 years here, you take 2014. 2014, you take $100 to be invested in the S&P 500. How much will that be worth today? Triple, almost about $364.37 here. If we even take this back here even further, and let's say, for instance, we look back in 1964 here. 1964, $100 in the S&P 500, you will see that it's at a astronomical amount here, right at $38,939. Imagine if you did $100 per month into the S&P 500 back in 1964, which is a lot of money. But this is why we like the S&P 500, because it's very broad, it's very diverse. And the next question may be, well, Sherwin, how do we invest into the S&P 500? Now, when we go right here and we look at this here, you can specifically go right here onto Fidelity site here, and one Fidelity fund or one index fund that we really like that tracks the S&P 500 is VOO, the Vanguard S&P 500 Index Fund. As you will see here, the top 10 companies, you will see the different industries and the different sectors. This is how you can actually go and buy this. And here on Fidelity, you can go and buy it for any dollar amount. If the S&P 500 is $532, if you want to put $25 towards it, if you want to put $50 towards it, whatever dollar amount, you can actually put it towards the S&P 500 utilizing the Fidelity website. That's one thing what they're good for. So the next time when you go here and you go to any financial website and you see an S&P 500 index, basically this means your 500 companies inside of this here, and you're going to have 11 different industries here. And so when we look at the S&P 500, it is the overall stock market. And when we look at the S&P 500, we want to go right here and look at the returns. So when we look at the returns here, we will see that the S&P 500 performance last year was 24.2%. And when we go and we look dating back to 2000 and we look at the red, we look at how many times has the S&P 500 has actually been down dating back to 2000 here. Generally what we do is we see red here, we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So out of the last 24 years, the S&P 500 has only been down 7 years. One thing what scares people is this right here, the 38.9%. But you will see here the years after that here, we had a bull market here. So the S&P 500 historically over time it is green over time. Now, when you invest and you do have years where the market is down, but what we see right here overall, we see more green than we do red. And that's why it's important when it comes to investing. That's one of the easy investments that you can make. It's right here in the S&P 500 because it has 500 companies. It has 11 different industries. So what does that mean? It's very broad, it's very diverse, and it's one of the easiest ways to, instead of trying to find that one best investment, why not buy all of them? I like to use in this analogy here, right? Instead of trying to find that one needle in the haystack, why not buy the whole haystack? In the S&P 500, as you will see right here, historically, it's been doing 10% for the last, but dating back to early 1900s. Over the last 14 years, it's been averaging 12%. And just over within the last year, it's up nearly 40%. To be exact, it's up 38% between last October and currently now. We are witnessing history in itself. This is what the S&P